What if I told you the strongest humans in history were not kings, not conquerors, not people with power, but ordinary people who lost everything and still refused to break? People who stood in the ashes of their own lives with nothing left but hope, no homes, no certainty, no guarantee of tomorrow, and yet they kept going. They chose humanity when the world chose darkness. When the world chose darkness, they chose hope when despair was easier. This is not just history. This is the story of the strongest humanity that ever existed. And once you hear it, you will never see strength the same way again. We'll explain everything in this video, step by step. Don't skip it. There are moments in history when the measure of humanity is not taken in triumph, but in endurance, not in empires built, but in lives rebuilt, not in power held, but in hope held on to. This is the story of the strongest humanity that ever existed, not because they were untouched by suffering, but because they were untouched by suffering, but because they refused to be defined by it. Picture a cold dawn in the ruins of a city. The air is heavy with dust, silence broken only by the distant echo of something that once was life. Walls have fallen. Streets are unrecognizable. Names are gone from doors that no longer stand. And yet, someone is there. A woman brushing debris away with bare hands. A father lifting stones not because he knows someone is alive beneath them, but because he cannot bear the thought that they might be. And he did nothing. This is where strength begins. This is where strength begins, not in certainty, but in the refusal to surrender to despair. History often celebrates its conquerors, those who marched across continents, who redrew maps, who commanded armies, but the strongest humanity was never found in those who held power over others. It was found in those who held power over themselves, in the prisoner who chose dignity over hatred, in the mother who shared her last piece of bread with a stranger's child, in the quiet, unseen decision to remain human when the world demanded otherwise. There was a time when darkness seemed absolute. There was a time when darkness seemed absolute, when entire populations were uprooted, when homes became memories overnight, when fear was not an emotion, but a constant companion. And yet even then there were acts so small they might go unnoticed, but so powerful they defied the very logic of cruelty. A hidden diary, written in secret, not to record suffering, but to affirm life. A hand reaching out in the dark, not knowing whose it would find, but knowing that reaching mattered. A whisper, "We will survive." And they did, not all, never all, but enough. Never all, but enough, but enough. Enough to remind us that strength is not the absence of breaking, but the courage to gather the pieces and keep going. Consider those who walked for miles with nothing but memory in their hearts. Refugees not by choice, but by circumstance. They carried no weapons, no wealth, no certainty of tomorrow, only something far more powerful, the belief that tomorrow was worth reaching. They crossed borders that did not welcome them. They faced futures that did not promise them anything. And still, they moved forward, because the strongest humanity does not wait for permission to hope. It creates hope, step by step. There is a quiet truth history does not always tell, that the greatest victories are often invisible. They are not marked by parades or monuments. They are marked by parades or monuments. They are marked by survival. By a child growing up where there should have been no future. By laughter returning to places where silence once ruled. By the simple, profound act of beginning again. Strength, in its purest form, is not loud. It does not boast. It does not announce itself. It does not announce itself. It is the steady heartbeat of those who refuse to give up, It is the teacher who rebuilds a school from ashes, the doctor who works without rest, not for recognition, but because someone needs them. But because someone needs them, the ordinary person who chooses kindness in a world that has given them every reason not to. This is the strongest humanity that ever existed. Not perfect, not unbroken, but unyielding. A humanity that endured wars, famines, displacement, injustice, and still found a way to sing, to love, to believe. A humanity that understood something essential, that even in the darkest chapter, the story is not over. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson history offers us. That strength is not something reserved for heroes in books or names carved in stone. It lives in ordinary people in impossible moments, making extraordinary choices, choices to stand, to care, to rebuild, to hope. If you found stillness in these words, subscribe to join this space of presence and share you deepest now in the comments below. Endurance is often misunderstood. It is not the absence of pain, nor is it a quiet acceptance of suffering as something noble or destined. It is far more difficult than that. It is the act of continuing when every instinct urges you to stop. It is waking up in a world that no longer resembles the one you knew and deciding, with trembling hands and a heavy heart, that you will still move forward. There have been countless moments in history when despair seemed not only justified but inevitable. Entire cities reduced to rubble, families separated by forces beyond their control, voices silenced by fear and uncertainty. In those moments, despair does not arrive suddenly. It settles slowly, like a shadow stretching across the mind, whispering that nothing will ever be the same again, and in one sense it is right. Things do not return to what they were, but endurance begins precisely at that realization, the acceptance that the past cannot be reclaimed, and yet the future must still be faced. Think of those who stood in the aftermath of destruction with nothing but fragments of destruction, with nothing but fragments of what once defined their lives. The streets they walked were no longer familiar, the landmarks of memory erased or broken. And yet, among the ruins, there were movements small, deliberate, almost fragile. Someone clearing debris not because they believed everything could be restored, but because doing nothing felt like surrender. Someone searching, calling out names into the silence, holding on to the faintest possibility that they might hear a response. Endurance lives in those moments of uncertainty. It does not demand certainty. It does not require guarantees. It does not require guarantees. It only asks for one thing, that you do not give up. There were individuals who endured not just physical hardship, but the slow erosion of hope itself. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still there was no clear sign that things would improve. Hunger became familiar. Fear became routine. Loss became something that could no longer be counted because it had grown too vast. And yet, even in that relentless passage of time, there were decisions being made, quiet, internal decisions that no one else could see. The decision to stand up again, the decision to share what little remained, the decision to believe, even faintly, that survival itself held meaning. It is easy, from a distance, to speak of resilience as though it were a trait someone either possesses or lacks. But history shows us something different. It shows us that endurance is often born in the very moment when a person believes they have nothing left, when strength, as they once understood it, has been stripped away. What remains is something deeper, something quieter, a refusal to disappear. There were those who walked across vast distances with no clear destination, guided only by the need to keep moving. Each step carried the weight of exhaustion, yet stopping was not an option they could accept. They carried memories instead of possessions, names instead of belongings, and in those memories lived a reason to continue. Even when the path ahead offered no promises, the act of walking itself became a declaration that despair would not have the final word. Endurance is not always visible in grand gestures. More often, it is found in the smallest acts repeated over time. A person rising each morning despite having no certainty of what the day will bring. A parent finding a way to comfort a child when there are no comforting answers to give. A stranger offering help to another, not because they have abundance, but because they understand what it means to have nothing, what it means to have nothing. In the darkest periods of human history, there were countless opportunities for people to abandon their sense of compassion, to turn inward and prioritize only their own survival. And yet, again and again, there are stories of individuals who chose otherwise. They chose to share. They chose to protect. They chose to care. They chose to care. These choices did not eliminate their suffering, but they preserved something essential: their humanity. Despair, by its nature, isolates. It convinces people that they are alone in their pain, that no one else can understand, that nothing they do will matter. Endurance pushes against that isolation. It reaches outward even when the effort feels impossible. It recognizes that survival is not only about the body, but about the spirit. The belief that connection, however fragile, still exists. There were moments when people stood at the edge of giving up, when the weight of everything they had endured seemed unbearable. And in those moments, endurance was not a grand decision made once and for all. It was a series of smaller decisions made again and again. Decision to take one more step, to hold on for one more day, to believe, even without evidence, that their story was not yet finished. What makes endurance so powerful is not that it conquers despair completely, but that it coexists with it. People endure not because they are free from doubt or fear, but because they move forward despite those feelings. They carry despair with them, but they do not allow it to define their actions. They acknowledge the darkness, but they continue to seek light, however faint it may be. History is filled with names and dates, with events that are recorded and analyzed, with events that are recorded and analyzed. But beneath those records lies something far more profound. The lived experience of individuals who faced circumstances that seemed insurmountable and chose in ways both small and significant to continue. Their endurance did not always change the course of history in obvious ways. It did not always lead to recognition or reward. But it ensured that life, in all its complexity and fragility, persisted. And in that persistence lies a quiet kind of defiance, a refusal to let despair erase everything, a determination to hold on even when letting go would be easier. It is not dramatic. It is not celebrated in the moment, but it is real, and it is powerful, and it is one of the clearest expressions of what it means to be human. Because endurance is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It is about learning how to stand within it, to breathe within it, to take one step forward even as the wind pushes back. It is about recognizing that while despair may shape the landscape, it does not have to determine the direction. And in that recognition, in that quiet, persistent movement forward, there exists a strength that cannot be easily broken, a strength that continues, even when everything else seems lost. If you found stillness in these words, subscribe to join this space. Of presence and share you deepest now in the comments below. Darkness in history is rarely abstract. It is not just a concept or a metaphor. It is lived, felt, and endured. It arrives in the form of fear that lingers in the air, in silence where voices once thrived, in the quiet understanding that the rules which once governed life have suddenly been rewritten. And in those moments when systems collapse and cruelty rises, the true test of humanity is not in power or survival alone, but in the choices people make when they are given every reason to abandon what is right. There have been times when the world seemed to turn against itself, when neighbor no longer trusted neighbor, when identity became a reason for division rather than connection. In such moments, darkness did not simply exist in distant places. It entered homes, conversations, and thoughts. It made ordinary life feel uncertain, even dangerous. And yet, within that uncertainty, there were individuals who chose to act in ways that defied the very nature of the world around them. Humanity, in the face of darkness, does not always appear as grand resistance or visible defiance. Often, it reveals itself in the quiet refusal to participate in cruelty, a person choosing not to betray another even when pressured, a family opening their door to someone in need knowing the risk it carries, a voice speaking truth even when silence would have been safer. These actions may seem small when compared to the scale of the darkness, but they carry a weight that cannot be measured by numbers alone. In periods of deep conflict, there were systems designed to strip people of their dignity, to reduce them to something less than human. Names replaced by numbers, identities erased, individuality suppressed. It was a deliberate effort to convince people that they no longer mattered, that they were no longer seen. And yet, even in those conditions, humanity found ways to persist. People remembered each other's names. They shared stories, however brief, as a way of holding on to identity. They found ways to express kindness, even when kindness was neither expected nor rewarded. There is something profoundly powerful in the act of recognizing another person's humanity, when the world insists on denying it. It is a quiet rebellion, one that does not rely on force, but on principle. To look at someone and see not a label, not a category, but a human being, this is where humanity asserts itself most clearly. And in times of darkness, this simple recognition becomes an act of courage. Darkness often thrives on dehumanization. It creates distance between people, convincing them that others are different, lesser, or undeserving of empathy. Lesser or undeserving of empathy. It builds barriers not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. And once those barriers are in place, it becomes easier to justify actions that would otherwise be unthinkable. But history shows us that even in the presence of such forces, there are those who resist this way of thinking. They refuse to see others as anything less than human, even when doing so places them at risk. There were individuals who chose to protect others, not because they were obligated, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. They hid strangers, shared resources, offered guidance. They acted not out of certainty, but out of conviction. They did not know how their actions would end, whether they would succeed or fail, whether they would be remembered or forgotten. But they understood that their choices mattered in that moment, that even a single act of humanity could stand against the tide of cruelty. In many cases, these acts went unnoticed. They were not recorded in official documents or celebrated in public. They existed in the margins in whispered stories, in memories passed down quietly. And yet they form a crucial part of the human story. They remind us that darkness, no matter how overwhelming, is never absolute. There are always points of light, however small, that continue to exist within it. Fear plays a powerful role in shaping behavior during such times. It can lead people to withdraw, to protect themselves at the expense of others, to make choices they might never have considered. under different circumstances. Fear can distort judgment, narrow perspective, and erode empathy. And yet, there are those who act in spite of fear, who acknowledge its presence, but do not allow it to dictate their actions. This is where humanity becomes most visible, not in the absence of fear, but in the decision to act beyond it. To choose compassion in a world driven by hostility is not an easy path. It requires strength, not just physical, but moral. It demands an awareness of consequences and a willingness to face them. It asks individuals to hold on to values that may no longer be supported by the society around them. And yet, time and again, people have made that choice. They have chosen to remain human, even when the cost of doing so was high. There is a quiet resilience in these choices, a steady commitment to something greater than immediate survival. It is the understanding that survival alone is not enough if it comes at the cost of losing one's sense of self. Humanity in its deepest form is not just about living, it is about how one chooses to live. Even under the most difficult circumstances, in the midst of darkness, there were also moments of connection that defied the surrounding conditions. People finding ways to communicate, to support one another, to create a sense of community where none should have existed. These connections were often fragile, easily broken by external forces, but they were real. They provided a sense of belonging, a reminder that even in isolation, one was not entirely alone. These moments did not erase the darkness. They did not undo the harm that had been done, but they offered something equally important, a glimpse of what humanity could still be. They served as a reminder that even when systems fail and structures collapse, the core of human connection can endure. And within that endurance lies a profound truth, that humanity is not defined solely by the conditions in which it exists, but by the choices made within those conditions. Even when surrounded by cruelty, people have the capacity to act with kindness. Even when faced with injustice, they can choose fairness. They can choose fairness. Even when immersed in fear, they can reach for courage. These choices do not always change the immediate outcome. They do not always lead to safety or success, but they shape the moral landscape of history. They define what it means to be human in the most challenging of times. They demonstrate that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there remains a space, however small, where humanity can still exist, where it can still be chosen, where it can still endure. Rebuilding does not begin with certainty. It begins in the aftermath, when the dust has not yet settled, when the full extent of loss cannot even be measured. When people stand in the remains of what once defined their lives and struggle to understand their lives and struggle to understand where to begin. There is no clear map in such moments, no set of instructions that can restore what has been taken. There is only the quiet, often overwhelming realization that everything familiar is gone, and yet something must be created in its place. Hope in these circumstances is not a feeling that arrives fully formed. It does not appear as confidence or clarity. It is fragile, uncertain, and often difficult to recognize. It exists in the smallest of hits, in the faint belief that rebuilding, however slow and incomplete, is still possible. It is not the denial of loss, but the decision to move forward despite it. There were people who returned to places they once called home, only to find emptiness where life once thrived. Streets without voices, buildings reduced to fragments, spaces that held memories now unrecognizable. And yet, they stayed. Not because it was easy, but because leaving would mean letting go of something they were not ready to surrender. They began with what little remained, clearing debris, salvaging materials, marking spaces where something new could stand. Rebuilding is not only physical, it is emotional. psychological, and deeply personal. It requires confronting loss again and again, not in a single moment, but in a series of realizations that unfold over time. Each broken object, each empty space, each memory revisited carries weight, and still, people continue. They choose to face those reminders not as reasons to stop, but as reasons to begin again. There is a particular kind of courage required to rebuild. It is different from the courage needed to endure immediate hardship. It is slower, quieter, and sustained over time. It asks individuals to invest in a future they cannot yet see, to put effort into something that may not succeed, to believe in the possibility of restoration even when evidence is scarce. This kind of courage does not rely on momentum. It is built step by step, often in isolation, often without recognition. Communities once scattered begin to find their way back to one another, not all at once and not without difficulty. Trust, once broken, is not easily restored. There are questions that linger, uncertainties that remain unresolved. And yet, through shared effort, through the simple act of working side by side, connections begin to form again. People who may have once been strangers become part of the same process, united not by circumstance alone, but by a shared desire to create something stable out of instability. In these moments, hope takes on a new form. It is no longer abstract. It becomes visible in action. In the rebuilding of a single home, in the reopening of a small shop, in the return of routine to places where routine had disappeared. These are not grand gestures, but they carry significance beyond their scale. They signal that life, despite everything, is continuing. Children play a unique role in the process of rebuilding. They adapt in ways that adults often struggle to understand. They find ways to create normalcy within abnormal conditions. A game played in a half-constructed space, laughter echoing through an area that was once silent. These moments do not erase the past, but they introduce something new. They remind those around them that the future is not entirely defined by what has been lost. There are also those who dedicate themselves to helping others rebuild, not because they are unaffected, but because they understand the importance of collective recovery. Teachers return to classrooms that no longer resemble the ones they left. They teach not just subjects, but stability, offering a sense of continuity in a world that has been disrupted. Builders work not just with materials, but with intention, aware that each structure represents more than shelter. It represents a step toward normal life. Rebuilding requires patience, a willingness to accept that progress will be uneven. There are setbacks, moments when efforts seem to stall or even reverse. There are days when the weight of what has been lost feels heavier than the promise of what can be gained. In those moments, hope is tested. It is not enough to believe once. It must be chosen repeatedly, even when doubt is present. Memory plays a complex role in this process. It can be both a source of pain and a source of strength. Remembering what once existed can make the present feel incomplete, but it can also provide a sense of direction. It offers a reference point, a reminder of what is worth striving for. People rebuild not just to replace what was lost, but to honor it, to carry it forward in new forms. There is also a transformation that occurs during rebuilding. What emerges is rarely identical to what came before. Circumstances change, perspectives shift, priorities are reevaluated. In some cases, what is built reflects a deeper understanding of resilience, a recognition of vulnerabilities that were previously overlooked. Structures may be stronger, systems more adaptable, communities more aware of the importance of unity. Hope in this context is not naive. It is informed by experience, shaped by hardship. It does not ignore the possibility of future challenges, but it refuses to be paralyzed by them. It becomes a guiding force, not because it guarantees success, but because it makes effort possible. Without hope, rebuilding would not begin. With it, even the most difficult tasks become conceivable. There are moments when progress becomes visible in ways that are impossible to ignore. A street once empty now filled with movement. A space once silent now carrying the sounds of daily life. These changes may seem gradual, but they represent a significant shift. They mark the transition from survival to growth, from recovery to renewal. And yet, even as rebuilding continues, the past remains present. It is not erased or forgotten. It exists alongside the new, shaping it, influencing it, influencing it. People carry their experiences with them, and those experiences become part of the foundation upon which everything else is built. This integration of past and present is not always easy, but it is essential. It ensures that what has been learned is not lost, that the strength developed through hardship is not set aside. Rebuilding and hope are not separate processes. They are intertwined, each reinforcing the other. Hope provides the motivation to rebuild, and rebuilding gives hope a tangible form. Together, they create a path forward, one that is not defined by perfection, but by persistence. It is a path marked by effort, by resilience, by the quiet determination to create something meaningful out of what remains if you found stillness in these words. Subscribe to join the space of presence and share your deepest now in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.